Elena Novak had always been nothing more than a shadow in Coldridge, Montana, and that's exactly how she wanted it. The unassuming town sat nestled between jagged mountains and endless forests where neighbors chatted about everything except her past. For 5 years, she'd worked as a driver for Mountain Transit, steering the town's only shuttle service with hands that moved like they remembered roads no civilian should know. What the friendly locals never suspected was that behind her quiet smile lay the sharp mind of a former military intelligence operative who had escaped the worst hostage situation in recent history by driving straight through a war zone that had claimed the lives of her entire team. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena was 38 but moved with the poised efficiency of someone who had spent years under constant threat. Her honey-brown hair was always neatly tied back, and her hazel eyes held a watchfulness that made people instinctively keep a respectful distance. She wore the same uniform every day, dark jeans, sturdy boots, and a Navy Mountain Transit polo that concealed a thin scar running across her shoulder blade, the permanent reminder of the day everything had gone wrong. The townspeople had theories. Of course, some whispered she was running from an abusive relationship. Others guessed she was hiding from big city stress after a breakdown. Mrs. Patterson from the library was convinced Elena had lost someone, a husband, maybe, or a child, pointing to how she never joined the town's frequent family celebrations. But Elena answered only what needed answering, maintaining an invisible barrier that clearly said, "This far and no further." What they didn't know was what sat hidden in her modest cabin at the edge of town, concealed by towering pines and a carefully maintained security system. Inside a locked room that didn't appear on the property's floor plans was an arsenal of survival gear, communications equipment, multiple passports with different names, emergency cash in various currencies, and detailed escape routes mapped out for every major city in Europe and Asia. Most revealing was the locked metal case under her bed containing a satellite phone that connected to only one number, and a worn photograph showing 5 people in desert camouflage standing beside an armored SUV, arms around each other's shoulders, faces dusty but smiling. Elena stood in the center, younger and more carefree than the woman who now drove senior citizens to doctor appointments in Coldridge, Montana. Every Tuesday evening, when her driving shift ended and the town settled into its dinner routines, Elena would sit in her living room with the photograph in her lap, running her fingers over each face while a police scanner hummed quietly in the background. In those moments, she wasn't Elena Novak, the shuttle driver. She was someone else entirely. On this particular Wednesday morning, storm clouds gathered on the horizon as Elena completed her pre-drive inspection of the Mountain Transit van. She was checking the tire pressure when she heard an unfamiliar engine approaching. Not the rattling pickup trucks or aging sedans common in Coldridge, but something heavier with the distinctive purr of government-issued transportation. She straightened slowly, wiping her hands on a rag as a black SUV with tinted windows pulled into the small lot beside the transit office. The vehicle had no markings, but Elena's trained eye caught the subtle reinforcement to the undercarriage and the specialized communications antenna partially concealed on the roof. 2 men stepped out, both wearing suits that failed to completely hide their athletic builds and alert postures. A woman emerged last, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a pantsuit that screamed federal agent. She surveyed the area with practiced efficiency before her eyes settled on Elena. For one heartbeat, Elena considered running her cabin had an emergency exit that led to a ravine, where she kept a motorcycle fueled and ready, but the moment passed. After 5 years, they had finally found her. The woman approached, her hand extended in a gesture of professional courtesy. "Ms. Novak? I'm Director Samantha Reed, Department of State Security." Not a question, but a statement. They knew exactly who she was. or rather, who she had been. Elena didn't take the offered hand, instead folding her arms across her chest as the familiar calm of crisis management settled over her. Mountain Transit opens at 8. If you need a ride, you'll have to wait like everyone else. Reed's professional smile never wavered. We're not here for a ride, Ms. Novak. Or should I say Captain Petrova? The name hit like a physical blow, but Elena's expression remained neutral. Some secrets stayed buried for years, but they always found their way to the surface eventually. And her biggest secret had just walked onto Mountain Transit's gravel. Parking lot wearing government credentials. I think you have the wrong person, Elena said quietly, turning back to the van. If you'll excuse me, I have seniors waiting for their medical appointments. Director Reed placed a thin file folder on the hood of the van. Korog, Tajikistan, 5 years ago. Operation Sentinel. Elena froze, her hand resting on the driver's door. The words alone were enough to transport her back to scorching heat, the smell of burning fuel, and screams over a radio that had gone silent too quickly. 4 operatives lost, Reed continued, her voice lowered. 1 missing, presumed dead. Except you weren't dead, were you, Captain? Elena turned slowly. What do you want? We need to talk. Reed nodded toward the SUV, privately. In the small conference room of the Mountain Transit office, with the blinds drawn and the door locked, Elena sat facing Reed while the 2 men stood guard outside. The file folder now lay open on the table between them, revealing satellite images, mission reports, and photographs that Elena had spent 5 years trying to forget. Let's start with the obvious, Reed said, tapping a finger on a surveillance photo showing Elena behind the wheel of her shuttle. Elena Novak doesn't exist. She was created 5 years ago, using techniques that only someone with advanced intelligence training would know. Elena said nothing, her face a mask of practiced neutrality. What interests me, Reed continued, is how Captain Katerina Petrova, one of our most skilled field operatives, managed to disappear so thoroughly that even her own agency believed she was dead. Former operative, Elena corrected quietly. My contract ended when my team died in Korog. Reed leaned forward. Did it? Because no resignation was ever processed. No death certificate issued. You simply vanished after driving through 70 miles of hostile territory controlled by the Tajik Revolutionary Front, territory that had already claimed the lives of your entire team. Outside the window, Elena could see the familiar sight of Coldridge's main street. Mrs. Winters was sweeping the sidewalk in front of her bakery. The high school track team jogged past in matching uniforms. Normal life continuing while her carefully constructed world began to crumble. Why are you here? Elena asked finally. After 5 years, why now? Reed closed the file and met Elena's gaze directly. Because 3 days ago, we intercepted communications suggesting that Malik Zubov is alive. The name landed like a grenade in the small room. Malik Zubov, the target of Operation Sentinel, the man responsible for the deaths of her team, the ghost she thought she'd left behind in the mountains of Tajikistan. That's impossible, Elena said, her voice steady despite the surge of adrenaline. Zubov died in the compound explosion. I saw it happen. Reed shook her head. Apparently not. Intelligence suggests he survived with severe injuries and has spent the last 5 years rebuilding his network. And now he's looking for revenge. Against whom? Against the operative who destroyed his operation and left him scarred and crippled. Reed's gaze was unwavering. He's looking for you, Captain Petrova. Elena absorbed this information with the calculated calm that had kept her alive through countless operations. If Zubov was truly alive and hunting her, then her cover in Coldridge was already compromised. The peaceful life she had built was about to end one way or another. What exactly do you want from me? She asked. Reed straightened in her chair. We want you to come in. Protective custody until the threat is neutralized. And then what? Return to active duty? Pretend the agency didn't abandon my team in Tajikistan? The bitterness Elena had suppressed for years seeped into her voice. The circumstances of Operation Sentinel were complicated, Reed said carefully. There were factors at play that weren't disclosed to field operatives. Factors that got 4 good people killed, Elena countered. Factors that forced me to drive through a war zone with nothing but a sidearm and a vehicle that barely held together. Outside the window, she could see her regular passengers beginning to gather at the mountain transit stop. Mrs. Chun, who needed dialysis. Mr. Grayson with his weekly cardiology appointment. The Peterson twins heading to their special education classes in the next town over. People who depended on her. People who had no idea who she really was or what she had done. Reed seemed to read her thoughts. These people are in danger as long as you stay here. Zubov doesn't care about collateral damage. In fact, he specializes in it. Elena knew she was right. The man they had been sent to capture 5 years ago had built his reputation on brutal public displays of violence designed to maximize terror. If he was truly hunting her, everyone in Coldridge was at risk. I need time, Elena said. 24 hours to settle my affairs here. Reed shook her head. We don't have 24 hours, Elena repeated firmly. Then I'll come in on my terms. If Zubov is really out there, you need me cooperative, not resistant. A silent calculation played out behind Reed's eyes before she nodded once. 24 hours. We'll have a team watching this town, but they won't interfere unless absolutely necessary. She stood, gathering the file. One day, Captain. Then we talk about how to end this permanently. As Reed and her men prepared to leave, she paused at the door. For what it's worth, the official report on Operation Sentinel has been classified at the highest levels. Whatever happened out there, someone doesn't want the full story known. After they left, Elena sat alone in the conference room, the familiar weight of her past pressing down on her shoulders. Through the window, she could see her regular passengers still waiting, checking watches and looking toward the transit office with confusion. With practiced composure, she stepped outside, apologized for the delay, and helped her passengers board the van. As she settled into the driver's seat, her hands moved automatically through the pre-drive routine she had performed countless times, adjusting mirrors, checking gauges, securing her seatbelt. But her mind was racing, calculating escape routes, safe houses, contingency plans that had gathered dust for 5 years. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As Elena drove her regular route through Coldridge, she cataloged everything she would need to take and everything she would have to leave behind. The emergency cash and documents from her cabin, the satellite phone, the photograph of her team. Everything else, the life she had built here, would have to be abandoned. At each stop, she found herself studying the faces of her passengers with new intensity, memorizing their features, their voices, the small kindnesses they had shown her over the years. Mrs. Chun patted her hand and thanked her for waiting at the dialysis center last month when her treatment ran long. Mr. Grayson shared homemade cookies his granddaughter had baked. These were good people who had accepted Elena without question, who had respected her privacy while still making her feel part of their community. She had chosen Coldridge precisely because it was unremarkable, a small town that didn't appear on most maps where people minded their own business and asked few questions. It had been the perfect hiding place for 5 years. Now it would become a memory, just like everything else she had left behind. As the day progressed, Elena maintained her normal routine while her mind worked through every possible scenario. If Zubov had truly survived and was hunting her, he would have resources, contacts, and an extensive network. The agency clearly believed the threat was serious enough to track her down after 5 years of silence. But something about the situation didn't add up. Operation Sentinel had been a standard capture mission, high-value target extraction in hostile territory. If there were factors at play that hadn't been disclosed to the field operatives, what exactly had they been sent to do? And why had their extraction plan failed so catastrophically? By the time Elena completed her final route of the day, returning her passengers safely to their homes, the sun was setting behind the mountains. She parked the van in its usual spot and performed her end-of-day maintenance checks with meticulous care, knowing it would be the last time. As she locked the transit office, the town sheriff, Ben Lawson, approached with his characteristic, unhurried gait. Sheriff Lawson had been one of the first people to welcome her to Coldridge, helping her find her cabin and introducing her to the transit company owner when she needed work. "Evening, Elena," he said, tipping his hat. "Noticed some government types around town today. Anything I should know about?" Elena had always appreciated the sheriff's directness. "Just some paperwork issues with my background check," she lied smoothly. "Nothing to worry about." He studied her face for a moment too long. "You know, in the 5 years you've been here, you've never once asked for help. Not once. But if you needed it." The offer hung in the air between them, sincere and uncomplicated. For a brief moment, Elena considered telling him everything about Korog, about her team, about the years she had spent looking over her shoulder. But that would only put him in danger too. "I appreciate that, Sheriff," she said finally. "More than you know." As she walked to her personal vehicle, an aging Jeep Cherokee that blended perfectly with the other practical vehicles in town, Elena felt the sheriff's eyes on her back. Another person she would have to leave behind without explanation or goodbye. At her cabin, Elena moved with focused efficiency. From beneath a loose floorboard in her bedroom closet, she retrieved a waterproof bag containing cash in multiple currencies, 6 different passports with her photograph, but different names, and a loaded handgun with spare ammunition. From behind the refrigerator, she pulled a hidden compartment containing encrypted flash drives and a set of contact information for people who could help her disappear again, if necessary. The satellite phone was next, powered up for the first time in years. It connected immediately, suggesting that someone had been maintaining the network even after she had gone off-grid. The only program number belonged to a former colleague who operated outside official channels, someone who might have information about what really happened in Tajikistan. As she packed only what was essential, Elena found herself drawn to the photograph of her team. 5 faces smiling in the harsh sunlight of a foreign desert. Daniel Quinn, communications specialist and the team's unofficial morale officer. Sonia Reeves, tactical expert with a gift for languages. Marcus Chun, their medical officer who could perform surgery with nothing but a first aid kit and steady hands. And Theo Blackwood, team leader and her closest friend, who had recruited her into the agency 10 years earlier. All of them gone now, their bodies left behind in the chaos of a mission that had gone catastrophically wrong. Or so she had believed. For 5 years, the sound of tires on gravel snapped Elena back to the present. She moved silently to the window, staying to the side as she peered through the blinds. A vehicle had pulled up outside, not the government SUV from earlier, but a nondescript sedan that immediately triggered her internal alarms. Standard unmarked surveillance vehicle, the kind used for covert operations when blending in, was paramount. 2 men emerged, moving with the unmistakable precision of trained operatives. Not Reed's people, their body language was all wrong, too aggressive, too intent. They approached her cabin with hands hovering near concealed weapons, scanning the surroundings with practiced efficiency. Elena's instincts, dormant for years but never truly gone, flared to life. These weren't government agents coming to protect her. These were hunters, and they had found their prey. In one fluid motion, she killed the lights and moved to the back of the cabin. The motorcycle she kept ready in the small shed behind her. Home would give her a head start, enough time to disappear into the network of forest. Service roads she had memorized for exactly this scenario. As she slipped out the rear door, Elena heard the crash of her front door being breached. Voices called out in a language she recognized immediately: Russian, with the distinctive accent of the Tajik borderlands. Zubov's men had found her first. Elena slipped through the darkened forest behind her cabin with practiced stealth, every sense heightened. The motorcycle started on the first try. She'd maintained it weekly, just like everything else in her escape plan. As she navigated the narrow trail leading away from her property, she heard shouts from the cabin and the crack of gunfire. Zubov's men weren't even trying to be discreet. The Forest Service road provided limited cover, but Elena knew these mountains better than her pursuers. For 5 years, she had methodically mapped every back road, trail, and abandoned logging path within. 100-mile radius, not because she expected to need them, but because old habits died hard. Now, those habits might save her life. She cut the motorcycle's headlight, relying on moonlight and memory as she pushed deeper into the national forest. Behind her, she heard engines revving as her pursuers gave chase. 2 vehicles at least, moving fast with no concern for stealth. These weren't the careful government agents from this morning. These were killers with a single objective. 10 miles into the forest, Elena veered off the main service road onto a nearly invisible trail that followed a dry creek bed. It was barely wide enough for the motorcycle, with low-hanging branches that whipped past her helmet. No car could follow this route. They would have to continue on the main road and hope to cut her off miles ahead. The trail opened onto a small clearing where an abandoned ranger station stood, its windows boarded and roof partially collapsed. Elena had discovered it years ago during her meticulous exploration of the area and had turned it into one of several emergency caches. She quickly located the loose floorboard under which she had hidden supplies, a burner phone, additional ammunition, basic medical supplies, and a topographical map marked with safe routes to the nearest highway. She checked the burner phone. No signal, as expected this deep in the mountains. She would need to reach higher ground or travel closer to civilization to make contact. The satellite phone from her cabin would have been more reliable, but she'd been forced to leave it behind in her hasty escape. Elena studied the map, plotting her next move. Her pursuers would likely split up, some continuing on the forest road, while others backtracked to search for the trail she had taken. She needed to stay ahead of them, to reach help before they could trap her in these mountains. The distant sound of engines confirmed her assessment. They were fanning out, searching methodically. Professional hunters who knew their prey wouldn't make it easy. Elena packed only what she absolutely needed, then headed back to the motorcycle. She would follow the old logging road that wound up the mountain's eastern face. It would be rough going, but it would lead to a fire lookout tower with line of sight to the nearest town. From there, she might be able to make contact. As she rode through the darkness, Elena's mind raced through possibilities. Reed had said the agency wanted to bring her in for protection, but Elena's instincts told her there was more to the story. If Zubov had truly survived and was hunting her, why now after 5 years? And how had he found her when even the agency had believed she was dead? The logging road grew steeper and more treacherous as it climbed the mountainside. Twice Elena had to dismount and push the motorcycle over particularly rough sections, all while listening for sounds of pursuit. The night air grew colder as she gained elevation, her breath forming clouds in the moonlight. Just before dawn, she reached the fire lookout tower. The structure stood like a sentinel on the mountaintop, offering a 360-degree view of the surrounding wilderness. Elena concealed the motorcycle beneath a stand of pine trees and approached cautiously, weapon drawn. The tower appeared abandoned for the season, but she checked each level systematically before finally climbing to the observation deck. From this vantage point, she could see for miles in every direction. The lights of Coldridge twinkled in the valley below, peaceful and unaware of the danger that had invaded their quiet town. To the east, the first hints of dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. And far to the south, on the main highway that skirted the edge of the national forest, Elena spotted headlights, vehicles moving with purpose, not the casual traffic of early morning commuters. She raised the burner phone, relieved to find 2 bars of signal. Not great, but enough. Her fingers hesitated over the keypad. Who could she trust? Reed and her government team might offer protection, but something about their sudden appearance after 5 years of silence felt wrong. Calling. Local authorities would only put more innocent people in danger. Finally, she dialed the one number she had memorized years ago, but never expected to use again. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered. "Who is this?" "Nightingale to Watchmen," Elena said, using the old code phrase that identified her too. "Former operatives. The Hawk survived the fire." A long pause then. "Verified location?" Elena gave her coordinates and a brief situation report. "Multiple hostiles, heavily armed. Possible agency involvement, but situation unclear." "Understood. Stay in position. Help is closer than you think." The call ended abruptly. Elena knew better than to call back or expect more information. In their world, communications were always brief, always cryptic. But the message had been received. Someone was coming. Whether they would arrive before Zubov's men found her was another question entirely. As full daylight spread across the mountains, Elena used the tower's spotting scope to survey the surrounding terrain. She counted 3 vehicles now moving along forest roads, the sedan she had seen at her cabin, plus 2 SUVs that had joined the search. They were quartering the area systematically, working their way steadily toward the higher elevations. Elena checked her weapon and limited ammunition. 6 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber, plus the spare magazine from the ranger station. Not enough for a prolonged engagement against multiple armed opponents. She would need to rely on stealth and terrain advantage if it came to a fight. The sun had been up for less than an hour when she spotted the first team of men moving up the trail toward the lookout tower. 3 figures in tactical gear, moving with the disciplined spacing of military professionals. Through the spotting scope, she could see they carried assault rifles and wore body armor. This was no simple retrieval team. They were equipped for elimination. Elena quickly assessed her options. The tower offered visibility but was essentially a trap, only one way down, no cover from gunfire. She gathered her few supplies and made her way down the ladder to the ground level. The surrounding forest provided better chances for evasion, allowing her to use the skills that had kept her alive through countless operations in hostile territory. She had just reached the tree line when the first shots rang out. A round splintered the wood next to her head as she dove for cover. They had spotted her. Elena rolled behind a fallen log, returning fire with controlled precision. One of her shots found its mark. A pursuer stumbled, clutching his shoulder, but remained upright behind cover. "Captain Petrova!" A voice called out in accented English. "There is nowhere to run. Malik Zubov sends his regards. He has waited 5 years for this reunion." Elena didn't respond, using the distraction to slip deeper into the forest. They wanted her to talk, to reveal her position. Instead, she moved silently from one cover position to the next, putting distance between herself and the shooters while working her way around to flank them. The gunmen spread out, advancing cautiously through the trees. Their training was evident. In their movements, these weren't common mercenaries but specialized operatives. Elena recognized their formation from her own training. They were forcing her toward the eastern slope, where the terrain grew steeper and offered fewer escape routes. For 20 minutes, the deadly game of cat and mouse continued through the forest. Elena managed to take down one of her pursuers with a well-placed shot to the leg, but the others adapted quickly, maintaining distance and using coordinated movements to tighten the net around her. She was running low on ammunition and options when the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors echoed across the mountainside. Both Elena and her pursuers paused, looking skyward as a black helicopter appeared over the ridge. It bore no markings, but its sleek profile and maneuverability marked it as military grade. For a moment, Elena felt a surge of hope. Perhaps this was the help promised by her mysterious contact. But that hope died as the helicopter banked sharply and a door gunner opened fire on her position. The rounds tore through the forest canopy, sending splinters and debris raining down as Elena pressed herself into the earth behind a rocky outcrop. The helicopter was working with the ground team, providing aerial support to flush her out. Whatever game was being played, it was clear that multiple factions wanted her either captured or dead, and they had brought serious resources to ensure success. With the helicopter circling overhead and ground forces closing in, Elena made a desperate decision. The eastern slope of the mountain featured a series of steep ravines, treacherous terrain that would be difficult to navigate, but might provide cover from both air and ground pursuit. It was a gamble that relied entirely on her superior knowledge of the landscape. She waited until the helicopter completed another pass, then sprinted toward the ravine. Gunfire followed her, kicking up dirt at her heels as she slid down the steep incline into the shelter of the rocky crevasse. The ravine was narrow, barely wide enough for a person to traverse, with overhanging rock formations that provided cover from above. Elena moved quickly through the ravine system, navigating by memory and instinct. Above her, the helicopter continued to circle, but its sensors and gunners could no longer get a clear shot. The ground team would have to follow her into the ravine, a significant tactical disadvantage given the narrow confines and her familiarity with the terrain. As she pushed deeper into the ravine network, Elena heard the sounds of pursuit growing more distant. The helicopter's rotors faded as it was forced to widen its search pattern. For the moment, she had created some breathing room, but she was still miles from safety, with limited resources and unknown numbers of hostiles between her and civilization. The ravine eventually opened onto a wider canyon where a seasonal stream had carved a path through the mountain. Elena followed the stream, moving as quickly as the rocky terrain allowed. Her military training had prepared her for extended exfiltration on foot, but 5 years of civilian life had softened her endurance. Her muscles burned with exertion, and a persistent thirst reminded her that she had limited water supplies. By midday, she had reached the lower elevations where the forest grew denser. The sound of the helicopter had disappeared entirely, but Elena maintained her vigilance. Just because she couldn't hear her pursuers didn't mean they had given up the hunt. She found a sheltered position beside a small waterfall and took the opportunity to refill her water bottle and reassess her situation. The burner phone showed no signal here in the canyon. She was effectively cut off from communication, operating on her own with no way to know if help was still coming or if her mysterious contact had been compromised. As she rested, Elena's thoughts turned to the events that had led to this moment. Operation Sentinel had been presented as a standard extraction: locate Malik Zubov, a high-value arms dealer, and bring him in for interrogation. The team had inserted without incident, located the target compound, and confirmed Zubov's presence. Everything had gone according to plan until the moment they moved to secure the target. The explosion had come without warning, tearing through the compound with devastating force. Elena had been outside the main building, providing perimeter security, when the blast knocked her unconscious. When she came to, the compound was engulfed in flames, and all communication with her team had ceased. Protocol dictated that she make her way to the extraction point and wait for the helicopter that would take them home. But the extraction helicopter never came. Instead, hostile forces had descended on the area, hunting for survivors. With no backup and no communication, Elena had been forced to improvise, stealing a battered SUV from a nearby village and driving through 70 miles of hostile territory to reach the border. The agency had declared the entire team killed in action. Elena, already operating under deep cover with limited documentation, had seized the opportunity to disappear completely. If the agency had abandoned them in Tajikistan, who was to say? They wouldn't do it again? Better to be a ghost than a potential liability. But now, 5 years later, the past had caught up with her. If Reed was to be believed, Zubov had survived the explosion that killed her team. And for some reason, both Zubov and the agency had suddenly developed an urgent interest in finding her. The sound of voices echoing through the canyon snapped. Elena back to the present. Male voices speaking in hushed tones, growing closer. She gathered her supplies and moved deeper into the forest cover, keeping the stream in sight, but staying hidden among the trees. Through a break in the foliage, she caught sight of two men moving along the stream. They wore hiking clothes rather than tactical gear, a smarter approach for blending in if any local hikers or rangers happened to be in the area. But the way they moved, scanning their surroundings with practiced efficiency, revealed their true purpose. Elena froze, controlling her breathing as they passed within 20 feet of her position. One of the men spoke into a radio, reporting their location and direction. So they were still coordinating the search, still confident they could run her to ground in these mountains. Once they had moved further downstream, Elena changed direction, heading west toward a series of old mining roads she had explored during her time in Coldridge. If she could reach one of those roads, she might be able to find transportation, or at least a faster route to civilization. The afternoon sun beat down through breaks in the forest canopy as Elena pushed herself onward. Her body ached from the constant movement over difficult terrain, but the alternative capture or death kept her moving despite the pain. She had survived worse conditions in her operational days, endured longer pursuits through more hostile environments. The difference was that then she'd had a team, a mission, a purpose that made the suffering worthwhile. What was she fighting for now? A quiet life in Coldridge that was already destroyed? The chance to disappear again, to build another false identity in another forgettable town? Or was there something more, the truth about what really happened? In Tajikistan, about why her team had been abandoned, about who had given the orders that sent 5 operatives into a trap. By late afternoon, Elena reached one of the old mining roads that wound through the western side of the mountain range. The rutted dirt track hadn't been maintained in years, but it offered easier travel than the forest floor. She followed it westward, hoping it would eventually connect with more frequently used roads. After an hour of cautious progress, Elena heard the distinctive rumble of an engine ahead. She immediately moved off the road, concealing herself in the underbrush as the vehicle approached. Through the trees, she made out a rugged jeep bouncing along the uneven track, driven by a solitary figure. When the jeep was nearly level with her position, Elena recognized the driver, Sheriff Ben Lawson from Coldridge, looking grim and focused as he scanned the roadside. Was he part of the search? Had he known her true identity all along, reporting back to the agency or to Zubov? Elena remained hidden, debating whether to reveal herself or let him pass. The decision was made for her when the sheriff suddenly stopped the jeep, cut the engine, and spoke clearly into the silence. "I know you're out here, Elena. I'm alone, and I'm not with them. Whatever trouble you're in, I want to help." Elena held her position, skeptical. It could be a trap, the most obvious one in the playbook. Send in someone the target trusts, someone who appears harmless, to draw them out. "Those government types came back to town looking for you," the sheriff continued. "Then some foreign fellows showed up asking questions. When I went by your place and found it shot up, I figured you'd head into the mountains." He gestured to the forest around him. "I've been patrolling these roads all day, hoping to find you before they do." Elena weighed her options. Her instincts, honed through years of fieldwork, detected no deception in his voice or posture. And practical reality was setting in. Night would fall soon. She had limited supplies, and her pursuers didn't seem likely to give up the search. Sometimes survival meant taking calculated risks. She emerged from the trees with her weapon lowered but ready. "How do I know you're not working with them?" Sheriff Lawson raised his hand slowly. "You don't. But I've been sheriff in Coldridge for 15 years. Before that, I was Army Rangers. I recognize trained operators when I see them, and those men in town aren't here for a friendly chat." He nodded toward her disheveled appearance. "Looks like they've already made that clear." Elena studied him carefully. "What did they tell you? The government folks?" "That you're a person of interest in an ongoing investigation." The others didn't bother with a cover story, just started asking questions with their hands resting on concealed weapons. He shrugged. "I've known you 5 years, Elena. Never gave me any trouble, always helped out when the town needed it. Don't much care what you did before you came to Coldridge. But I do care about armed men hunting someone in my jurisdiction." His words had the ring of truth. But Elena had been betrayed before by people she trusted far more than a small-town sheriff she'd known for 5 years. Still, her options were limited, and instinct told her this might be her best chance. "If I come with you, where would we go?" "They'll have the roads watched." The sheriff nodded. "I figured as much. Got a hunting cabin about 15 miles west of here. Off-grid, not in my name. We can lay low there while we figure out who's after you and why." Elena made her decision. "If this is a trap, Sheriff, I want you to know I won't be taken alive." "No trap," he said simply. "Just one veteran helping another." The ride to the hunting cabin was tense, with Elena watching constantly for signs of pursuit or ambush. Sheriff Lawson navigated the network of mining roads and forest tracks with the confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime in these mountains. They avoided main roads and stayed under the forest canopy whenever possible to minimize the chance of aerial detection. The cabin, when they reached it, was exactly as described, a simple one-room structure of weathered logs, set in a small clearing surrounded by dense pine forest. A natural spring provided water, and solar panels on the roof generated enough electricity for basic needs. It was the kind of place that wouldn't appear on satellite imagery or property records. "My grandfather built this place back in the 40s, the sheriff explained as he unlocked the heavy wooden door. "Been in the family ever since, but we keep it quiet. Good place to get away when the job gets to be too much." Inside, the cabin was sparse but comfortable, a wood stove for heat, a small kitchenette, a sitting area with worn but clean furniture, and a single bedroom visible through an open door. Gun racks on the walls held hunting rifles and shotguns, while fishing gear hung neatly from hooks by the entrance. Elena did a quick security assessment. 2 exits, windows with clear lines of sight in all directions, defensible position with good visibility of the approaching terrain. Not perfect, but better than running through the forest with diminishing supplies and energy. "You should eat something," the sheriff said, opening a cupboard stocked with canned goods. "Then we need to talk about who's hunting you and why half the federal government seems to have shown up in my town overnight." As she sat at the rough-hewn table with a bowl of heated stew, Elena made another calculation. If the sheriff had wanted to betray her, he'd had ample opportunity. And she needed allies if she was going to survive long enough to uncover the truth about Zubov and Operation Sentinel. "What I'm about to tell you puts you in danger," she began. "Once you know, there's no going back." Sheriff Lawson settled into a chair across from her, his expression serious. "Figured as much when I decided to come looking for you. I'm listening." Elena took a deep breath, then spoke the truth for the first time in 5 years. "My name isn't Elena Novak. It's Katerina Petrova. I was a covert field operative for a joint task force under the State Department, specializing in high-risk extractions in hostile territory. She told him about Operation Sentinel, about the explosion that killed her team, about her desperate escape through Tajikistan, and her decision to disappear rather than return to an agency that had abandoned them. She explained about Director Reed's visit and the revelation that Malik Zubov might still be alive, hunting for the operative who had left him scarred and broken. The sheriff listened without interruption, his weathered face revealing nothing but attentive focus. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "That explains the hardware those foreign boys were carrying," he said finally. "Not exactly standard issue for tourists. Zubov's men found me before I could decide whether to trust Reed and go in," Elena confirmed. "They came to kill, not capture. And now you're caught between them, this Zubov character who wants revenge, and your old agency who wants what exactly? To protect you, or something else?" It was the question that had been haunting Elena since Reed's visit. "That's what I need to find out." Something about Operation Sentinel never added up. "We were sent to capture Zubov alive for interrogation, but the explosion suggests someone wanted him dead instead. And the extraction team that never showed up, that's not standard procedure even for deniable operations. Sounds like somebody's covering their tracks," the sheriff observed. "Question is, who? And what were they trying to hide?" "That's what I need to find out," Elena said, determination hardening her voice. "My team deserves justice. And I deserve the truth about why I've spent 5 years looking over my shoulder." Sheriff Lawson nodded slowly. "Well, you're safe here for tonight at least. Tomorrow we can figure out your next move." He gestured to the satellite phone on his belt. "Got this for emergencies in the backcountry. If you need to make a call, it should be secure enough." Elena eyed the phone thoughtfully. The mysterious contact she had reached earlier, Watchman, had promised help was coming. But with multiple forces hunting her and conflicting agendas at play, she needed more information before she could trust anyone completely. As night fell over the mountains, Elena stood at the cabin window, watching the darkness gather between the trees. Somewhere out there, Zubov's men were still searching. And somewhere, Director Reed's government team was also hunting for the operative who had vanished in Tajikistan 5 years ago. The quiet life she had built in Coldridge was gone. Elena Novak, the shuttle driver who kept to herself and asked for nothing, had disappeared as completely as Captain Katerina Petrova had 5 years earlier. Now she existed in the shadowy space between identities, between past and future. But for the first time in 5 years, she was done running. Whatever the truth about Operation Sentinel, whatever forces had conspired to kill her team and hunt her across continents, it was time to face them. Not just for her own sake, but for the 4 operatives who had died in that compound, the teammates, whose faces still haunted her dreams. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new revelations. But tonight, in this hidden cabin deep in the Montana wilderness, Elena allowed herself a moment of resolve. The hunter had become the hunted, but that was about to change. Dawn broke over the hunting cabin as Elena checked and rechecked her weapon. Sheriff Lawson had provided additional ammunition from his personal supplies, along with a hunting rifle she could use for longer-range engagements. 5 years of civilian life hadn't dulled her muscle memory. Her hands moved through the familiar motions of weapons maintenance with practiced precision. "You've got that look," the sheriff observed, pouring coffee into 2 chipped mugs. "The one that says you're about to do something I probably won't approve of." Elena accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "I need to contact someone who might have answers about what really happened in Tajikistan. Using my satellite phone will create a record," Lawson warned. "If your agency is monitoring communications, they'll trace it here." "That's what I'm counting on," Elena replied. "It's time to stop running and start getting answers." She dialed the secure number she had memorized years ago, the direct line to the only person within the agency she still trusted. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. "This is an unsecured line. It's Petrova," Elena said simply. A pause then. You're supposed to be dead. So is Zubov, apparently. Yet here we are. Elena kept her voice steady. I need the truth about Operation Sentinel, Michael. The real mission parameters, not the cover story they fed my team. Michael Hayes had been her handler for 3 years before Tajikistan. The voice in her ear during countless operations. The analyst who provided intelligence and extraction coordinates. If anyone knew what had really happened 5 years ago, it would be him. This isn't a conversation we should have remotely, Hayes said, his voice tense. Where are you? Safe, for the moment. But Zubov's men found me, which means my cover is blown. And Director Reed showed up with a team, claiming they want to bring me in for protection. Reed? Hayes sounded genuinely surprised. Samantha Reed is personally involved. You know her? She was promoted to Director of Operations after Sentinel. Her career advanced considerably following your team's sacrifice. The implication wasn't lost on Elena. Was my team set up, Michael? Another pause, longer this time. I've spent 5 years trying to piece together what really happened. The official files were classified beyond my clearance level immediately after the operation failed. But I've been gathering fragments, communications logs, requisition orders, flight plans that were filed and then deleted. And? Elena pressed. And I think your team wasn't sent to capture Zubov. I think you were sent to eliminate him and make it look like an accident. But something went wrong. Elena felt a cold certainty settling in her chest. Her team had been given orders for a capture mission, but the explosion suggested a different objective entirely. Who gave the order? That's what I haven't been able to confirm. But whoever it was had enough authority to classify an entire operation at the highest levels and enough influence to advance Reed's career afterward. Sheriff Lawson, who had been listening intently, spoke up. Sounds like you were pawns in someone's political game. It gets worse, Hayes continued, having heard the sheriff's comment. 3 weeks ago, I found references to something called Operation Clean Sweep, a systematic elimination of anyone with direct knowledge of what happened in Tajikistan. Including me, Elena said, the pieces falling into place. That's why Reed suddenly showed up after 5 years. They think Zubov might expose whatever really happened, so they're tying up loose ends. Most likely, Hayes agreed. Listen, Katerina, I can help you, but not over the phone. There's a secure location. The call abruptly cut off. Elena tried redialing, but the line remained dead. Someone's jamming satellite communications, she said, setting down the phone. Which means they found us. Sheriff Lawson moved to the window, carefully scanning the surrounding forest. No visual on anyone yet, but that doesn't mean they're not out there. Elena's mind raced through options. Hayes had confirmed her suspicions. Operation Sentinel had been more than a simple capture mission, and now someone was eliminating witnesses to whatever had really happened. If she wanted answers, she would need to find Hayes in person. But first, she had to survive the immediate threat. We need to move, she said, gathering her equipment. They'll have the cabin surrounded soon if they haven't already. The sheriff checked his own weapon, a well-maintained service pistol, and nodded toward a trapdoor partially hidden beneath a faded rug. There's an old mine shaft tunnel under the cabin. Grandfather used it during Prohibition to hide his still from federal agents. Comes out about half a mile north, near the stream. Elena felt a surge of admiration for the sheriff's foresight. You didn't mention this last night. Figured I'd keep one card up my sleeve, just in case. He shrugged, old habits. They had just begun moving furniture to access the trapdoor when the first shots shattered the cabin's front window. Glass exploded inward as both Elena and the sheriff. Dove for cover, positions? The sheriff called out, keeping low behind an overturned table. Elena had already crawled to a vantage point where she could see through a gap in the curtains. At least 3 shooters in the tree line to the east. Looks like Zubov's men, not government agents. More shots followed, methodical and precise. Not meant to hit targets they couldn't see clearly, but to keep them pinned inside while the assault team maneuvered closer. "They're trying to flush us out," Elena assessed. "Standard close-quarters combat approach. They'll breach the door once. They've moved into position." The sheriff checked his ammunition. "How do you want to play this?" "We need a diversion," Elena said, quickly formulating a plan. "Something to draw their attention while we access the tunnel." Her eyes fell on the propane tank connected to the cabin stove. "How attached are you to this place?" Understanding dawned on the sheriff's weathered face. "Been meaning to renovate anyway." Working together with the efficiency of experienced operators, they created a controlled propane leak and set up a delayed ignition using the hunting rifle secured to a chair. Rigged to fire at the tank when triggered by a tripwire. The mine shaft entrance would shield them from the initial blast, while creating enough chaos to cover their escape. "Ready?" Elena asked, positioned by the trapdoor as the sheriff finished the final preparations. He nodded grimly. "Ladies first." Elena descended into the darkness of the tunnel, the sheriff following close behind. The passage was narrow and low, forcing them to crouch as they moved away from the cabin. The earthen walls were supported by ancient timber beams that groaned under the weight of decades. They had traveled perhaps 50 yards when the explosion rocked the mountain. Even within the tunnel, the concussive force was powerful enough to stagger them. Dust and small debris rained down from the ceiling as the shock wave passed. "That ought to keep them busy," the sheriff muttered, brushing dirt from his shoulders. They pressed onward through the tunnel, navigating by the beam of a single flashlight. The air grew increasingly stale as they moved deeper into the mountain, suggesting that parts of the old mine shaft might have collapsed over the years. "How well do you know this tunnel?" Elena asked, noting the deteriorating condition of the support beams. "Used to play in here as a kid," the sheriff admitted. "Haven't been through in maybe 20 years, though. Grandfather always said it came out near the North Stream, but—" His voice trailed off as they reached a section where the tunnel narrowed significantly, partially blocked by a cave-in. A small opening remained at the top, just large enough for a person to squeeze through if they were careful. "After you, or should I test it first?" the sheriff asked. Elena studied the debris pile and surrounding beams. "I'm lighter. I'll go first and see if it's stable." She carefully climbed the pile of fallen rock and timber, testing each handhold before committing her weight. The opening at the top was even tighter than it had appeared, but Elena managed to wriggle through with controlled movements that minimized disturbance to the precarious pile. On the other side, the tunnel continued, showing signs of less deterioration. "It's passable," she called back. "But be careful, that pile could shift." The sheriff began his ascent, moving deliberately despite his larger frame. He was halfway through the opening when a distant rumble echoed through the tunnel aftershocks from the explosion, or perhaps Zubov's men using explosives of their own to search for them. Whatever the cause, the vibration was enough to destabilize the already weakened structure. With a sickening crack, one of the main support beams split. The sheriff lunged forward as debris began to fall, Elena grabbing his outstretched hand and pulling with all her strength. They tumbled together onto the tunnel floor as the opening collapsed behind them, sealing the way back with tons of rock and dirt. A cloud of dust enveloped them, choking their lungs and reducing visibility to zero. "You okay?" Elena gasped between coughs. The sheriff's response was a pained grunt. As the dust began to settle, Elena directed the flashlight toward him and saw the problem. A jagged piece of wood had impaled his thigh during the collapse, and blood was already soaking through his pants. "Don't look so worried," he managed through gritted teeth. "Had worse from a bull moose back in '98. Elena quickly assessed the wound. The wood had entered the outer thigh, likely missing the major arteries, but the bleeding was still concerning. Using supplies from a small first aid kit the sheriff carried, She stabilized the fragment in place. Removing it would only increase bleeding, and created a pressure bandage to slow the blood loss. "Can you walk?" she asked, helping him into a sitting position. He tested his weight cautiously, wincing. "Not winning any races, but I can move." With Elena supporting part of his weight, they continued through the tunnel at a much slower pace. The sheriff's breathing grew increasingly labored as they progressed, and Elena could feel him leaning more heavily against her with each step. "Talk to me," she said, trying to keep him focused. "Tell me about Coldridge. Why did you stay there all these years?" The sheriff managed a pained chuckle. "Same reason you picked it, I suspect. Quiet. Predictable. People mind their own business." He paused to catch his breath. After 3 tours in Afghanistan, predictable seemed like paradise. Elena understood completely. After years of operating in the world's most dangerous regions, the simple rhythms of small-town life had been exactly what she needed. "The seniors on my shuttle routes, they'll wonder where I am." "Sally from the diner already took over your route," the sheriff informed her. "She's been wanting to get out of food service for years. Told everyone you had a family emergency." The thought of life continuing in Coldridge without her brought an unexpected pang of loss. For all her detachment, Elena had built connections. They're the kind of quiet, undemanding relationships that allowed her to feel human again after years of operating as something else entirely. After what seemed like hours but was likely less than 40 minutes, they reached the tunnel's exit, a narrow opening partially concealed by overgrown vegetation. Daylight filtered through the leaves, momentarily blinding after so long in darkness. Elena helped the sheriff into a sitting position against a tree and assessed their situation. The tunnel had indeed brought them out near a stream, in a secluded ravine surrounded by dense forest. The explosion at the cabin would have drawn attention, but they had put considerable distance between themselves and their pursuers. The sheriff's condition, however, was deteriorating. His face had grown pale, and the bandage on his leg was soaked through with blood despite the pressure. He needed medical attention soon, or the wound could become life-threatening. "You need to go," he said, reading her thoughts. "I'll only slow you down." "I'm not leaving you to die in the woods," Elena replied firmly. "We move together." "Stubborn as a mule," the sheriff muttered. "Must be why you survived this long." Elena helped him to his feet, supporting his weight as they began the arduous journey downstream. The ravine provided good cover from aerial surveillance, and the flowing water would help mask their trail from tracking dogs. If they could reach a road, they might find transportation, or at least a location with cell service to call for help. As they moved, Elena's mind worked through their limited options. Hayes' interrupted call had confirmed her suspicions, but left crucial questions unanswered. Who had authorized the real mission in Tajikistan? What connection did Zubov have to the agency that made him a target for elimination? And how had he survived an explosion designed to kill him? The sun was high overhead when they finally emerged from the ravine onto an old logging road. The sheriff's condition had worsened significantly. He was barely conscious now, his weight almost entirely supported by Elena. "Need to rest," he mumbled, his voice faint. Elena eased him down against a fallen log, checking his pulse rapid and weak, signs of advancing shock. The makeshift bandage was completely saturated, and his skin felt cool and clammy despite the warm day. "Stay with me, Sheriff," she urged, applying fresh pressure to the wound. "We're going to get you help." His eyes focused on her with effort. "Ben," he corrected. "After all this, might as well use my name." "Ben," Elena acknowledged with a small smile. "I need you to hold on a little longer. I'm going to find us a way out of here." She surveyed their surroundings, looking for anything that might help. Their situation. The logging road was overgrown but still visible. It had to lead somewhere. In the distance, beyond a bend in the road, she thought she heard the sound of an engine. "Someone's coming," she whispered, drawing her weapon and moving to a position where she could see without being seen. A vehicle appeared around the bend, not the sleek government SUVs or the tactical vehicles Zubov's men used, but an old pickup truck bouncing along the uneven road. The driver, a man in his 60s wearing a flannel shirt and baseball cap, seemed to be alone. Elena made a split-second decision. The sheriff Ben wouldn't survive much longer without medical attention. They needed transportation, and this might be their only chance. She stepped into the road, holding up a hand to flag down the truck. The driver slowed, eyeing her suspiciously through the windshield. Elena did her best to appear harmless despite her disheveled appearance. "Please," she called, holstering her weapon out of sight. "My friend is hurt. He needs a hospital." The truck came to a stop, and the driver rolled down his window but didn't kill the engine. "What happened to him?" "Hiking accident, Elena." "Lead smoothly." "He fell and was impaled by a branch. He's lost a lot of blood." The driver hesitated, clearly weighing the risk of helping strangers against his conscience. "Where is he?" Elena gestured to where Ben lay partially concealed by the log. The driver peered in that direction, then made his decision, turning off the engine and stepping out of the truck. "I'm Jim," he said, following Elena to Ben's position. "Used to be a medic in the Navy. Let me take a look." Elena felt a surge of desperate hope as Jim knelt beside Ben, examining the wound with practiced hands. "This is bad," he assessed, "but not impossible. Help me get him to the truck. I've got better supplies there, and I can take him to the regional hospital in Morton. It's about an hour from here." Together, they managed to lift Ben into the truck's back seat. Jim retrieved a comprehensive first aid kit from behind his seat and worked quickly to apply a proper pressure dressing. Then set up a makeshift four from supplies he apparently kept for emergencies. "You military?" he asked Elena as he worked. "Something like that," she answered vaguely. Jim nodded, seeming to understand the non-answer. "Figured. The way you move. How you handled the situation. Seen it before." He finished securing the four. "He's stable enough to transport now." "You coming with us?" Elena looked down at Ben's pale face. The right choice, the tactical choice, would be to separate. Send Ben to safety while she continued alone, unburdened by a wounded companion. But the thought of abandoning him after he had risked everything to help her felt wrong on a fundamental level. "Yes," she decided, "I'm coming." They were 10 minutes into the drive when Jim spoke again. "Don't mean to pry, but you two don't look like you were out for a casual hike. Those look like gunshot holes in your jacket, not branch tears." Elena tensed, calculating how much to reveal. "It's complicated." Jim's weathered face remained impassive. "Usually is. Listen, I don't need details. But if someone's hunting you, the hospital might not be the safest place." "We don't have much choice," Elena replied, glancing at Ben's unconscious form in the back seat. "He needs proper medical care." "True enough," Jim agreed. "But Morton General has a sheriff's deputy stationed in the EA at all times. Standard procedure for a rural hospital. They'll have questions." Elena hadn't considered this complication. A law enforcement presence met official reports, IDs checked, questions asked about gunshot wounds or suspicious injuries. Exactly. The kind of attention they couldn't afford with both government agents and Zubov's men hunting them. "You said you were a medic," she said slowly. "How good were you?" Jim gave her a sideways look. "Good enough to know when someone needs more than I can provide. But also good enough to stabilize a wound like that if I had the right equipment." He paused. "I have a cabin about 20 minutes from here. It's well stocked. I prepare for emergencies. But no guarantees." It was another calculated risk, trusting this stranger with both their lives. But Elena's instincts told her Jim was genuine, and they had few alternatives. "The cabin," she decided. "Please." Jim nodded once and turned onto a different road, heading deeper into the forest rather than towards civilization. Elena kept her hand near her concealed weapon, watching both their surroundings and Jim himself for any sign of deception or threat. But the former Navy medic drove steadily, occasionally checking Ben's condition in the rearview mirror with professional concern. Jim's cabin proved to be a sturdy two-bedroom structure set in a clearing, surrounded by tall pines. Unlike the sheriff's hunting cabin, this one had solar panels, a satellite dish, and other modern amenities that suggested it was used regularly rather than just for occasional getaways. They carefully transferred Ben inside, where Jim had converted one bedroom into a surprisingly well-equipped medical space. Proper examination table, medical cabinet stocked with supplies, even an oxygen concentrator, and basic monitoring equipment. "Prepare for emergencies, huh?" Elena commented, taking in the professional setup. Jim shrugged as he cut away Ben's blood-soaked pants to better access the wound. When you live this far out, waiting for an ambulance isn't always an option. Besides, old habits die hard. He worked methodically, cleaning the wound, removing the wood fragment with surgical precision, then irrigating and suturing the damaged tissue. Elena assisted where she could, following his calm instructions while keeping part of her attention on the windows and doors, old habits of her own that had never quite died. "He's lucky," Jim pronounced finally, hanging a proper forebag and checking Ben's vital signs. "Missed the femoral artery by less than an inch. He's lost blood, but with fluids and antibiotics, he should recover." "Thank you," Elena said, the words feeling inadequate for what this stranger had done. Jim washed his hands in the small sink. "Don't thank me yet. He still needs watching for the next 24 hours, and there's always risk of infection." He studied her face. "Meanwhile, you look like you could use food, a shower, and rest, in that order." Elena couldn't remember the last time she had eaten or properly rested. Since the moment Zubov's men had arrived at her cabin, she had been operating on training and adrenaline alone. "Food would be good," she admitted. "But I need to make a call first, if you have a secure line." Jim gestured to a satellite phone mounted on the wall. "As secure as it gets out here. Help yourself while I fix something to eat." Elena dialed Hayes' number again, hoping he would answer despite their abruptly terminated earlier conversation. After several rings, a different voice answered, female, professional, cautious. "Who is this?" "I need to speak with Michael Hayes," Elena said, keeping her voice neutral. "Mr. Hayes is unavailable," the woman replied. "May I ask who's calling?" The phrasing sent warning signals through Elena's mind. Not "he's in a meeting" or "he's out of the office," but unavailable, often code for in custody or worse. "This is an old friend," Elena said carefully. "Please tell him Nightingale called." "I'll pass along the message if I see him," the woman responded, her tone giving nothing away. "Is there anything else?" "Yes," Elena decided. "Tell him I'm going to visit our mutual friend in Montana. He'll know what I mean." She ended the call, her mind racing. Hayes was compromised, either under surveillance or directly in custody. The reference to "our mutual friend in Montana" was a code they had established years ago, referring to a secure drop site near Glacier National Park where Hayes had once left emergency supplies and documentation for an operation that went sideways. If Hayes was free to act, he would understand she was heading to the drop site. If he was under duress, the message would mean nothing to his captors. Jim returned with a tray of sandwiches and coffee, setting it on a small table. "Your friend is resting comfortably, should wake up in a few hours." He nodded toward the phone. "Get through to whoever you needed?" "Not exactly," Elena admitted, taking a sandwich. "But I got enough information to know what my next move needs to be." "And what's that?" Elena considered how much to share with this man who had already helped them so much. "There's a place I need to get to about 100 miles north of here. It might have information that could help me understand why people are trying to kill me. Jim sipped his coffee thoughtfully. That's quite a drive with people hunting you. Even more complicated with a wounded man who shouldn't be moved for at least a day, preferably 2. I know, Elena said, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on her shoulders. But every hour I delay gives them more time to find us. You planning to leave him behind? Jim asked without judgment. Elena looked toward the room where Ben lay recovering, the man who had risked his life to help her when he could have. Simply reported her location and washed his hands of the whole situation. No, she decided firmly. I'm not leaving him. Jim studied her face for a long moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. I might have a solution. Let me make a call. As he stepped away to use the satellite phone, Elena finished her sandwich and allowed herself a moment to truly feel the exhaustion that had been building for days. Her body ached from the constant movement, the combat, the stress of perpetual vigilance. 5 years of civilian life had softened her more than she wanted to admit. Jim returned, his expression cautiously optimistic. I've got a friend with a medical transport helicopter. Former Army medevac pilot who now does private contracts. He owes me a favor, and he's discreet. Elena felt a surge of hope mixed with wariness. How discreet? The kind who asks no questions when I call in a marker, Jim assured her. He can be here by morning, get you and your friend to wherever you need to go. His chopper is equipped for medical transport, so your friend can travel safely. It seemed too perfect, raising Elena's natural suspicions. Why would you do this? You don't know us. You don't know what kind of trouble we're in. Jim's weathered face softened slightly. I was in Somalia in '93. Bad situation, cut off from our unit. A stranger helped us, a local with no reason to risk his life for American soldiers. Never even told us his name. He shrugged. Sometimes the world works in circles. You pay back what you owe to whoever needs it next. The simple philosophy struck Elena deeply. In her years as an operative, she had seen the worst of humanity: betrayal, cruelty, self-interest at the expense of others. But she had also encountered unexpected allies in the most dangerous places, people who offered help with no expectation of return. Thank you, she said again, the words carrying more weight this time. Get some rest, Jim advised. I'll watch your friend and keep an eye on the perimeter. Tomorrow comes early. For the first time in days, Elena allowed herself to truly sleep, her body surrendering to exhaustion in the small second bedroom of Jim's cabin. Her dreams were fragmented flashes of the explosion in Tajikistan, her desperate escape through hostile territory, the 5 years of quiet vigilance in Coldridge, and the faces of her team who had died believing they were on a sanctioned mission to capture a dangerous arms dealer. She woke at dawn, instantly alert, her hand reaching for the weapon she had placed within easy reach. The cabin was quiet except for the soft sounds of movement in the main room. Elena dressed quickly and moved silently to investigate. Jim sat at the small dining table, cleaning a hunting rifle with practiced efficiency. He looked up as she entered, nodding in greeting. Your friend is awake. Fever's down, vitals are stable. He's tough. Elena moved to the makeshift medical room, where she found Ben propped up slightly on the examination table, his color much improved from the deathly pallor of the previous day. You look terrible, he commented when he saw her, his voice weak but lucid. You're one to talk, she replied with relief. How do you feel? Like I got shot, stabbed, and dragged through a coal mine. He attempted a smile. So better than expected. Elena quickly brought him up to speed on their situation, Jim's help, the planned helicopter transport, and her intention to reach the drop site where Hayes might have left information about Operation Sentinel. Ben listened carefully, his sheriff's mind analyzing the tactical situation despite his weakened state. If Hayes is compromised, They might have the drop site under surveillance. Possibly, Elena acknowledged. But it's the only lead I have. If I want answers about what really happened to my team and why everyone suddenly wants me dead or captured, I need to start there. We need to start there, Ben corrected firmly. I didn't get impaled by a 2x4 just to sit this out. At the finish line. Before Elena could respond, Jim appeared in the doorway. Choppers inbound. ETA 10 minutes. Better get ready to move. The helicopter appeared exactly as promised, a modified civilian model with medical equipment and a pilot who asked no questions beyond the essential details needed for flight planning. Jim helped them board, ensuring Ben was properly secured for transport, then handed Elena a satellite phone. Direct line to me, he explained. If you need anything, call. Signal works anywhere. I don't know how to repay you, Elena said. As the rotors began to spin up, Jim shook his head. Remember what I said about circles? Just help the next person who needs it. He stepped back, raising a hand in farewell as the helicopter lifted off. As they flew north toward Glacier National Park, Elena watched the wilderness passing below, her mind focused on what lay ahead. Somewhere in those mountains was a cache of information that might explain why her team had died, why Zubov had survived. And why, after 5 years of silence, multiple factions were now hunting the quiet shuttle driver from Coldridge, Montana. Whatever the truth, Elena was done running. It was time for answers, time for justice, not just for herself, but for the 4 operatives who had trusted her with their lives and paid the ultimate price for someone else's deception. The helicopter banked slightly, heading toward the snow-capped peaks in the distance. Behind them, the life Elena had carefully built in Coldridge was gone forever. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and possibly death. But also, perhaps, the truth she had been seeking since she drove alone through 70 miles of hostile territory 5 years ago, carrying the weight of her team's deaths and questions no one seemed willing to answer. Whatever that truth might be, Elena was finally ready to face it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.